Hey everybody, it's Action Hour. I'm Lindsay Baker, and today I'm here with the latest on the Reyes Elk at Point Reyes Seashore National Reserve. Do you know that they have extended the contracts? The lease is for 20 more years. And you know, if you've been following the story, you know there are 3 herds. They have permission. If the number, this artificially low number that they've set, goes above a certain amount, that they are going to shoot the elk on a national reserve. I know you think you heard me wrong, but it's the truth. And today I have with me 2 gentlemen. I have Jack Gashite, who is the Gashite. You make me say it wrong. Jack Gashite, the Tree Spirit Project. And he has also been a huge campaigner, seriously. He has been a huge campaigner for the Tule Elk, following this from the beginning, hauling water to the elk, getting the water poured out, going back, and we're going to show you, we're going to take you through this whole thing. And we also have with us Scott Webb, who is Advocacy Manager for Turtle Island Restoration Network, and it's also known as TURN. And you guys are here supporting, and you work more on the water, the sea end of it, but it's all connected and related. Gentlemen, thank you for being here today. I'm going to play a clip right now because I want to get people up to speed on what's going on that have not been following the story, and then we'll talk about
Point Reyes is the only national park where they can be found. In last evening's fog, I spotted a herd gathered around their water hole, but it's bone dry. Those who enjoy watching the elk and advocate for them are very worried.
It just makes you upset and angry because our Park Service, in my opinion, could just do so much better.
In fact, most of the water sources for the elk at the Tamales Point Reserve have dried up or are very depleted. Matt Polverosa Klein has spotted half a dozen dead elk in the past few weeks, and he's worried about a repeat of a drought from 5 years ago that killed more than half of the elk here.
This herd, I'm worried about them, especially with the size of the herd and the young that I'm seeing.
The National Park Service declined my request for an interview, but a spokesperson emailed there are a number of seeps and springs in the area that are frequented by the elk, and that their wildlife cameras have spotted elk, including this one, using them. She also said the park has a contingency plan should the water sources completely dry up. The Park Service points to this creek at McClure's Beach as a source, but the advocates tell me the steep ravine can prove dangerous to the elk.
Oh, look at that. Got a dead elk, actually.
Polverosa Klein spotted vultures on the carcass. He believes the elk may have lost her footing and died in the fall.
Just days after they found this Tule elk, a female, her bones had been stripped clean.
The hooves are there, the skull and other bones, not much else. The Park Service says there's no sign the elk died in the fall, that the animal bedded down in McClure's Creek and expired for unknown reasons. Point Reyes is...
Okay, I wanted to stop there, and Jack, would you comment on that explanation for how there is a water spring available to them? They just have to go down this really steep decline, but they don't know how one died. Do you want to give us your response to that?
Sure, Lindsay. Hi, everyone, and thanks for having on this issue, which is ongoing and disturbing. I also want to give a shout out to In Defense of Animals. I'm their elk campaigner as well as represent the Tree Spirit Project, and they've stepped up big time and really gotten involved in helping the Tule Elk, especially with their concern for animals. And that one example you saw there in that news coverage of Park Service horrific mismanagement. I admire Matthew, the photographer's professional restraint in saying so much better. That is the understatement of the century. As he well knows, I have no such restraint. So they're doing a horrific job and misrepresenting what's going out there. Now, that news has since changed in the last few weeks since we've got rain here in California. So the elk aren't desperately dying of thirst the way they were, but now they've just moved on to the next debacle, which is not providing them food inside a fenced reserve. So they still don't have adequate year-round food and water, and they will continue to suffer and die, especially in our drought season, which here in California is summer and fall, until the elk fences come down. That photograph there represents the those markers, there are 406 Tule elk, by the Park Service's own count, have died of malnutrition and thirst in the past decade. And
We're
we're
having
awaiting
a little
now.
trouble. Sorry, Jack, for cutting in. We're having a little trouble with your sound. You're cutting out a little bit. Let's try it without the headphones, and also if you have a telephone, if you put your phone on airplane mode, it might help because there is some interference. Let's jump into another clip while you do that, and we'll get back to you. We don't want to get ahead of ourselves anyway. So let's watch the second part of that to catch people up to speed.
The advocates are also worried about embers from Marin's Woodward wildfire reaching the elk reserve.
And it's possible, with the way embers can float in the wind, if it did get to that place and grass fires started, it could wipe out all the elk.
The fire is still miles away, but I saw firsthand yesterday how quickly the winds can change and how quickly it can spread.
I just stopped up at the Woodward fire, and turns out that things are getting a little bit hot here. Let me show you. Yeah, the fire's coming towards our vehicles, mine included, so I'm getting out of here.
And if a wildfire starts in the reserve, the elk can't escape. They're penned in by this cattle guard and an 8-foot fence that runs from Tamales Bay to the cliffs by the ocean. As I wrapped up the day, I found this herd just north of the fence, a massive bull elk on the south side. Calling out. He wandered off into the mist on his own. The advocates tell me the Park Service is more concerned about keeping the elk away from cattle ranchers than doing what's best for this California native, and that is allowing them to roam free.
They shouldn't be locked up in a place where there isn't a perennial stream that can provide them water in a safe sense.
I'll report back if the conditions at the reserve worsen.
Wow. So when was that that report that we saw there, and have they come back? Go ahead, Jack.
I don't know exactly the date of it, but it was before we got the rain. So that's summer, late fall. We got rain. Scott actually might remember the date better than I do about when we got our first rainfall just a month ago or so, because he's the water guy, as we're saying here, and I'm more concerned with.
Okay, let's go ahead and let him take it then. Tell us a little bit about the water, Scott, because that is your area of expertise. And what's going on? Will they have enough water? And one other thing came to mind to me. It's kind of a cynical feeling, but because now they have some water, suddenly they're going to start shooting. To me, it feels like one way or another, they're trying to get rid of them. And that's just my personal opinion.
Well, you're not too far off there. Regarding the water, yes, we had a crazy storm that hit out in Marin County. Gosh, I think it was the end of October. It was a lot. I think the Tampayas watershed got around like 15 inches of rain, which is insane amount. I live out in West Marin myself. Well, I just recently moved, but yeah, my house even flooded. I mean, it was a lot of water. It was great to see our streams. We see all Chinook salmon come back already, which is awesome. But one big storm is not enough at all in the slightest. Yeah, it's a good Band-Aid for a little bit. Yeah, the elk got a little bit of water. Having said that, though, this putting a Band-Aid on a broken bone, I mean, this is a much bigger issue. And a lot of the issue is not necessarily just due to rain, but a lot of this water is being allocated towards these ranchers here that is going towards private practices that is subsidized by our tax dollars. It's not necessarily just due to the water situation because it rained one time. Again, it's not the issue at all. We need to get the ranchers out to make sure that this water is equally allocated out towards the elk. So again, happy to rain for sure. We hope it continues to rain. We need it. We need it. We need it. But one storm's not going to be enough or nor to rationalize stopping of killing the elk at all.
Right. Thank you for that. Jack, go ahead and
Scott reminds me to give viewers an overview or perspective here. Is my sound okay now, by the way?
Yeah, it's better.
Okay. Good. So here's the deal. Point Reyes National Seashore is relatively small as national parks go. It's about the 10th the size of Yosemite. It's 71 acres, but a third of the entire park, about 26,000 acres of that is given over to ranches, to private ranches that don't own the land. It's public land. They're leasing it at lower than market value rates, which is why the ranchers don't want to leave. And they make all sorts of claims that we're supposed to be here. No, that's not true. That's not the founding legislation. So they're occupying a third of this land, and it's thousands of cows versus just a few hundred elk. And all the Park Service's policies now have been co-opted and favor the ranches. So Scott was talking about water and could talk more about that perhaps, but they're polluting it with a huge amount of manure, untreated sewage that goes onto the land, pollutes the waterways, eventually gets in the Pacific Ocean. And all of that is to the detriment of Tule Elk, who are in addition, the reserve, which is the elks in the park, are behind an 8-foot tall fence, 3 miles, and keeps them on land that is going to be drought stricken once again in the summer and the fall. So elk are going to suffer and die until the fences come down, which the Park Service doesn't want to do because the cattle operations don't want the elk to run free in a national park. That's the overview.
Okay, we want to look at a little clip we have now of you talking to a farmer. So let's stay on.
However, I just want to state for the record the big picture, which is you may not believe it because I'm on the opposite side apparently of this issue, as you stated. But I'm only 60. I'm a little kid, and the world has changed around your business, which is to say that in my opinion, and I believe the opinion of everybody here, that the form of business that you've done for many years in good faith, the world has changed around you, and doing it as you've done it is no longer, in my opinion, and their opinion, not sustainable. It's denuding the environment and polluting the water, and there's so many environmental degradations that are no longer scalable to feed 350 million Americans, not 200 million Americans or 100 million Americans. So that we may differ on, but I just want to state that for the record. That's where I come from, to be on the opposite side of this issue as you.
I'm not sure that we really agree on the scale that you think we are. The average dairy in California, I believe, is 1,200 cows as an average, and that's averaging from, herds up in Humboldt County that milk 50 cows.
You're 800, 840,
500 cows, 500 cows. That's way less, less than half of that.
I read the. Yeah, we just read the
total animals. We milk 500 cows.
How many total animals?
Probably around 800.
Thank you. Well, anyway, ballpark. We don't need to get into the granular, but so. Yes, you're right. You're smaller than stuff. In fact, Jared Huffman spoke your words, and he said, well, it's better than what's going down in Bakersfield with 5,000 cow operations. So yes, but that's not still, to our way of thinking, acceptable inside a national park. And we disagree on that.
So, however, there is enabling legislation.
There is indeed.
If you read that, you read that in the final of page 3. I was just starting to read that. I've been wading through the whole thing.
Us too.
What's that?
I don't believe that was the original intent.
Pardon?
I said I do not believe that was the original intent.
Well, it's stated in there that was
Not in the original documentation, though. Salazar was the one that
And we're having a little trouble with the sound there. So I think we've seen enough to get the picture. Let's go ahead and talk about that a little bit. So the thing that was interesting that I saw, and I'd like you both to comment on it, is the fact that he's not any longer denying that doing animal agriculture on a public national park reserve land for wildlife is destroying it, but we're only doing it. We're doing it less than others. Why didn't you go over there and bother them? Because we're the small guys. That's what I kept hearing. We're the small guys. He even kind of tried to allude to he had less than he actually had. So that tells me that they are, in a sense, running scared. But it seems like what the Park Services is doing is keeps, no matter what happens, no matter how it's exposed, even with their nodding to the truth, they're still going forward with their plan. And that is what is so insane. I'd like you both to comment on that, if you would. Jack, want to go first?
Sure. You've got that exactly right. It doesn't matter how insane it is, they're going forward with their plan. And it's maddening. And it's funny, I hadn't seen that clip in, about a year now. And that's, I mean, I don't hold the guy, well, he's doing what he's doing. But as I said in that clip, he's been doing it for years and the world has changed around him. And it doesn't matter where the cows are. Their argument is they're small, local, organic. And you can just punch holes in all of that, which is, it's not small if all the cows in that place are generating about 8 million gallons of feces and urine every year dumped on that land. It doesn't matter that you're smaller or you're doing less. And this is the same kind of distracting bait and switch claims that our own congressman, an otherwise good environmentalist, Jared Huffman, is making. Well, it's better than Bakersfield and the CAFOs, as they call them down there. And really, it's not true. In fact, they're worse because they take up more land here. Those concentrated animal feeding operations, one can argue, like humans living in New York City, are actually more efficient of resources versus having them spread out over a national park and degrading a national park. That's absolutely insane. That's why we can win this entire issue by just telling more people about it. Scott, please. If you
Yeah,
want to
no, and I think also something too I want to put in perspective here. We need to take a step back. I mean, of course, these like conversations are hot topics, like regarding the long-term use of ranching and cows in the United States. I mean, it's a big talk, it's a big debate, it's a big paradigm shift that will and should happen. Having said that, we are talking about a national park. National park, regardless of how big or small this is, the national park is just not a place for private practice like this. The national park has an obligation to preserve unimpaired natural and cultural resources of our country. And clearly, this obligation is not being met here in Point Reyes. It's impossible to actually preserve unimpaired natural and cultural resources when you have ranchers in the park. Again, like, because I see it, the current affections of national park and their loyalties appear to be with these few elite ranchers who, again, we talked about this earlier, but got paid off. I mean, they have been paid. They have been paid an equivalent of $380 million in today's dollars, if you look back when they got paid a long time ago. And they're currently using my tax dollars to turn around, make a private profit, to which I see none of, while at the same time polluting one of my favorite places on the planet, the only national seashore on the Pacific Ocean.
Thank you for saying that. And I want to throw in here that not only is it our park, what about, as we've all put a lot of consideration into this, the indigenous people? Let's watch a video and hear about how long ago this land, what was going on there for many, 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 many centuries. Let's go ahead and watch that.
It's the bottom line. Why don't they care? Like Cousin said, that elk came up to him because it's asking for help. They didn't just come up to people like that. They had plenty of food. They're coming around the ranches because they're hungry. But back to the cultural practices, what I was saying, the reason why this dirt is this color is because cultural practices, we burned this land so there would be grasses. The grasses aren't here anymore though. These are weeds. These are all weeds. The native grass is gone because the cattle have eaten it all, have eaten all our medicine. We need to restore the native life that was out here.
So we're going to offer a song, and again, for our elk relatives, just ask Creator to help them continue their life and what they were meant to. To be here, how they were meant, in the manner in which they were meant to be here. And again, remember, water is life. That liwa, that sacred life source, which our Tule Elk relatives need. So we're going to have those intentions, that prayer in this song.
So I thought that was really interesting. I thought we should bring that in. Do you guys want to comment on that? And have you been working with these gentlemen? We also talk a little bit in a few minutes about all the other celebrities and other people that are supporting you. But go ahead. We'll start this time with Scott and then jump to Jack. Go ahead and comment on, have you been receiving support or working in cooperation with the indigenous people of that area? Or are there separate campaigns going on, and what has their experience been, if you happen to know?
Definitely. Well, that was Jason who was speaking earlier from the Coast Mohawk Tribal Council. Yeah, they are great. We've been working really closely with. Yeah, well, that's a rally that we had before the record of decision came out, which was the decision that pushed forward kind of a lot of these policies that Jack was alluding to prior regarding culling of the elk going forward. So that was kind of, again, the last big push for us to try and, raise awareness around this issue before this, of course, awful decision occurred. Having said that, because we can't really, like, folks like Jack and I can't be necessarily the faces and voices of this movement. It makes no sense. It's inappropriate. It's not good. These Coast Mohawk Tribal have been there for, over 10,000 years in this area. However, at the same time, the indigenous going on there is a bit of a tricky situation as well. Great and Rancheria, who's a federated tribe, is working with the National Park Service as well on a management plan there. So again, it is an issue full of nuance and it is difficult. And again, I'm maybe not one of the best to speak on that per se, but we've also been trying to make these partnerships with the Coast Mingo Tribal Council, with Teresa Harland, who's right now creating the Alliance for Felix Cove, who right now is an effort to save her family home, which is actually on national park property, who the National Park Service has kind of let just go completely. And she's advocating and fighting front lines to bring back her family home currently. So definitely recommend checking out Teresa Harlan. She's doing incredible work and she's an incredible woman as well.
Yeah, I happen to have a clip of her. I don't know if it was from the information sent to me by your group. So did you want to play that? Or Jack, do you want to comment first and then we can talk about playing it? Go ahead and respond on that with comments.
Either way, I was just going to, the point is that the so-called history that the ranchers would refer to and most people in America think is, oh, the ranchers have been there 4 generations or 5 generations or 150 years. Well, how do you define history? As Scott mentioned, the Miwok had been on that land for over 10,000 years until we, my European ancestors, I suppose, came in and took it away. So what's historic? And ultimately, back to Scott's other point, which again bears repeating, a national park, everyone agrees, whether you're vegan or vegetarian or pro-cattle or not, all that, shouldn't be a cattle operation or private business of any kind, an extractive industry inside a national park boundary. So if you want to, Teresa's great. We had her speak recently at a rally we did just this past Saturday.
No, let's go ahead and listen for a moment and we'll take it from there. Where is she? There we go.
A few weeks ago, Secretary Haaland was at Alcatraz. And when she was at Alcatraz, she came as the Secretary of Interior. But the San Francisco Bay Area Indian community greeted her as auntie, sister, relative. And when she came here, she said, "The land tells a story, and you can feel it." She also talked about how the U.S. government and missionaries tried to strip memory of culture and tradition from Native children by stealing them away to boarding schools. These erasure policies were effective, but not successful. Coast Miwok land is just across that water, from Sausalito to nearly the Russian River. And my mom grew up on the western shore of Tamales Bay with her family. They worked for the dairy ranches. They gathered abalone and oysters. They dug.
So apparently I wasn't aware of the fact that the native indigenous people there worked for the ranchers. Does anyone know a little more? I know I'm putting you on the spot because you didn't send me the media directly, but can anybody fill us in on that a little bit more? Like we're going back in history a little bit, but it's interesting to see the full picture, I think.
Scott, I'm not keeping up here. Deb Haaland is a Native American. She's now Secretary of the Interior. We also have a newly appointed head of the entire Park Service is also Native American. I'm not sure.
So my question was, in that clip, it said that the woman that was speaking, Teresa Harlan, yes. She said that her grandmother had to work for the ranchers. So I'm asking about the history. You were just saying the ranchers say they've been there forever, but it appears that they not only displaced the elk and all the wildlife, but also the indigenous people. Now, I may not be getting the full story, and I'm looking to
it's definitely, and that's kind of what I was saying prior. It's a nuanced issue, like many things in this country, right? It's not a black and white necessarily scenario, but the ranchers have been there for 1850s, right? Which is a long time in our little bubbles, but at the same time, as we've both been alluding to, Coast Miwok folks have been there for plus 10,000 years. So again, which is a drop in the barrel compared to the whole thing. There, of course, were still people working and living on the land prior, of course, for a long time. So of course there's integration to it. And again, a lot of the ranchers, this is like Jack said, like this has been their industry, this has been their life, doesn't mean necessarily bad people per se, but it's just their way of business. So of course there's that crossover, and like many things in this country, it's not a black and white issue. There's crossover. However, Teresa Harlan's been an amazing advocate for removing the ranches, because now we are at a time where we need to shift the narrative. The paradigm needs to change. We are at a critical point where climate change is raging its face all over right now. We need to make these decisions, and we need to invest in actual green restoration work and not continue to subsidize these practices, which are, destroying this land. But to answer your point, yes, there of course was nuance and crossover here and there. But yeah, she's been an amazing advocate, and she continues to be so.
Okay, great. Jack, did you want to comment? I think you're frozen. Oops. Let's go ahead and do you happen to know, Scott? Jack, if you can hear me, please go back out and come back in. Do you happen to know? I know that Alexandra Paul has been part of the campaign. Let's go ahead and show that clip, and then Jack, I'll let you come in. You're not frozen anymore.
Hi, I'm Alexandra Paul, and I am urging you to help the Tule Elk being held captive and being killed at Point Reyes National Seashore in California. This is an issue close to my heart because in the 1980s, I went to the California desert with my brother Jonathan to non-violently sabotage a Tule Elk hunt. But now, decades later, Tule Elk are still being terrorized and killed. But this time, it's in a national park. Elk are dying where they should be flourishing. It's terrible because National Park Service policies confine and kill elk for private cattle ranchers. Ranchers lobby Washington politicians so rancher profits come before elk lives. Hundreds of elk have died. So here's how you can help the Point Reyes Tule Elk. Join In Defense of Animals rally on December 4th in San Francisco. Sign and share the petition. Call Congressman Jared Huffman's DC office and tell him you are outraged. And stop supporting the killing of wild and farmed animals by living vegan. I stand with In Defense of Animals to protect Tule Elk in our national parks. I hope you will too.
All right. Jack, do you want to talk a little bit about that, the event, the protest that she was talking about, the demonstration?
Yeah, and I want to thank Alexandra Paul for being a celebrity who's recently stepped up and joined our campaign. I mean, this is an example of how broad our coalition can be. We are a loose-knit or ad hoc coalition, as we say, with many different groups, from Scott's Turtle Island Restoration Network to Tree Spirit Project to In Defense of Animals, Resource Renewal Institute, Western Watershed Project, Restore Point Reyes, Shame of Point Reyes, and on I could go. Alexandra Paul is obviously an animal advocate, learned about this issue, and appropriately then is willing to come forward and say, yes, this is wrong. The elk should not be managed, which is to say killed in a national park. The cattle operations have to go. We can all agree on these basic things. And the more people like her who use their platform of celebrity and notoriety to come forward and say this, then the more the public is informed. We will press on the politicians who ultimately shape these atrocious anti-wildlife, pro-industry policies out of Washington. So she alludes to notifications to Huffman, which we have on our various websites, which we're plugging here, I see on the crawl. And this is how it has to change. Many more people have to become informed, and we press on the government to change the politics, which is just absurd. And there's that beautiful Tule Elk, that the 8 foot tall, there's mesh in between those posts, just 3 miles, and keeps that animal fenced in, unable to roam inside a national park. It's just ridiculous.
I want to talk about that because before we watched the video and we saw about the fires and about them being trapped in there, and we didn't talk about it. So I would like both of you, if you would like to, address this. Scott, do you want to go first? And then I'll let Jack come in. Would you like to address that point of the fence being there and how it affects not only the animals, but also the whole ecosystem there? Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, definitely this is more, I feel like, Jack's realm for sure, understanding kind of the degradation that occurs when you're fencing off a herd and that such. But yeah, At the same time, like as you mentioned, if there's a fire that rolls through there, there is no place for these elk to go. It's also because it cuts them off, it is impossible for them to find these active streams and perennial sources that they need to actually get water. At the same time, like there's not a lot of water out there, and most of this water is being allocated towards ranchers. So at the same time, the elk are not going to have a chance of surviving if they can't actually find where these spring sources are and become find areas where, again, it's really difficult to get to water and there's not a lot of water there in the first place.
Right. And as far as how it affects the ocean, the fenced in elk does affect the ocean. And in terms of all the cow, for one thing, the cow manure, there's so many cows, the cow manure is going in the ocean. But doesn't it like offset it because everything is so connected to everything else? We'll let Jack weigh in on that. But that's sort of where I was going from asking you about, does it actually affect the ocean as well? And the fires, how they affect. So putting the fence there is detrimental to both the sea and the land, I guess is my point. Do you agree or not?
Yeah, definitely. And just, I guess, couple on that point as well, like riparian habitats, you said it's all intertwined, right? Like these riparian streams have a long time have co-evolved with elk to be there to help maintain these. When you have big cows stomping on these streams and like you're alluding to, having ranchers scraping manure into these streams, yes, it's going to be awful for the habitat. This is going to create channelized environments, which will, these manure will stream right into the ocean and causes terrible effects to a beautiful home for gray whales, for dolphins, coho salmon as well. Again, the Central Coast, the County Marin, is probably one of the most important areas, spawning grounds for coho salmon, an endangered species that has been listed for 20 years, but we're still not seeing them come back. And the reason is because the habitat is being decimated. And Point Reyes has some very critical habitats. So yes, having those fences there, concentrating cows, destroying streams, absolutely intertwines with everything and decimates the ocean, decimates the stream, and does not give these species a chance of surviving.
Thank you. And Jack, do you want to jump in now on that one? Jack?
Hi. I was frozen out there for
Yeah, I know you're getting frozen out and missing some things, but we'll keep going. So we were just talking about the effect of the fence. One word for you, fence. I know you go crazy.
Yeah, I can run with that. Yeah, I mean, George Werthner, who's a wonderful environmentalist I've learned a lot from, says it really well, and I'm paraphrasing, but fences harm wildlife. You can't have fences without doing deleterious effect to all wildlife, especially the large ones that can't cross it. But it affects their migration, they're searching for food and water, their reproduction. Herds can't expand. There's a genetic bottleneck at the Tule Elk Reserve. I mean, ironically, it's called a reserve, and it's a place where elk are harmed. The antlered guy there is a male, obviously, and that's his female harem, as they call it, oddly enough. That's at Point Reyes Seashore at the Tamales Elk Preserve. And those guys should be free to roam over 71,000 acres of park, and in my opinion, anyway, even beyond. They don't do any harm the way some people think, grizzly wolves might. They're herbivores, and they should be free to roam and look for their herbs, which is to say forage, vegetation. And they can't do that right now. It's absurd.
They're so beautiful. Look at that one. And these are photos that you've taken. Can
I just say, that guy, just hold that picture. So I fell in love with this guy. I was walking out the 3 miles to go check on the pond level during the drought. And I was with a couple other people. And I just let them go ahead, and I just was kind of near this guy, and I just stood there for, 15 or so minutes with my camera quietly. And you can just see, for me anyway, I just have fallen in love with these guys. The more time just the gentleness, that face, and that giant antler rack. It's such a beautiful, innocent guy. Like, how dare we put this guy inside a national park and then do anything that would harm him? So that's the animal lover part in me. But again, even without the elk, I would be involved in this campaign because it's harming a national seashore, which is a wilderness preserve. This is a place where people go. Yeah, thank you for actually. So there's an artist rendering of the Brown area where you see those sad cows who are also captive, and that's a whole other vegan argument. But just look at how much of that land is given over to cattle industry. And that's all the national seashore there, that triangular peninsula on the left side of the map. And there's lots of cattle outside the park as well.
Yeah.
They just don't belong. And as Scott said earlier, it bears repeating, these ranchers were paid. Their land was purchased from them. They were given millions of dollars to leave. They were given a wonderful 5-year transition period to leave. Right. and sell if they want, or start their business elsewhere, or retire as they wish. And instead, they've dug in, they're entrenched, and they've created this entire mythology about, oh, hardworking little rancher. It's just not true.
Now, I do want to jump in and say one thing. You know, we are not against the ranchers. I know you're not against the ranchers. You said that, and you've made videos on how you reach out and talk to them and so forth. But they are not aware that they can do, there is a thing in Scotland, this huge explosion of ex-farmers going into other types of plant-based. They're doing different uses of the land for concerts, events. They're doing Airbnbs. They're doing glamping. And they are making so much money. And if any of these cattle ranchers happen to watch, it's called Farmers for Stockfreefarming.org. And this organization is amazing. And the model can work in America. And what they have is a model of transforming those businesses and making them more profitable for the farmers and for the planet, and of course for the animals. It's a win-win. So there is really no reason. What we saw with that farmer, just want to say one more thing. What I saw in that video, you talking to him, he's saying, we've been doing this forever. So it's a mindset that has to change. Do you guys want to comment on that?
Yeah, I'll hop in there too. I mean,
Sure.
again, which is all just super true, everything you just said there. But at the same time, I've got to remember for these, like we said earlier, this is a national park. Again, there shouldn't be,
Right.
This is for preservation. This is for wild spaces. These are important places. We all got really excited when we saw Biden's 30 by 30 announcement. At the same time, when we're seeing that 30% of public land or land that's being protected includes agricultural land, again, is inherently going to disqualify any protection services that should be doing. And of course, with the ranchers too, like, I get it. They are getting a good deal. Unlike ranchers outside the national park, so these seashore ranchers, unlike ones who are out in Sonoma Marin County, again, I have friends who do work in these areas. These ones here, they pay no property taxes. They receive below market rents. Like, they're paying less in rent than I am for an apartment here in the Sunset District in San Francisco. They get discounted grazing fees. They have government maintained roads. They have landlords who you can do whatever you want. I mean, again, if you think about this, it is such a sweet deal. Building and fencing. And in addition, the NPS provides wildlife management, which for their pest, aka the elk, they're able to confine, haze, remove the elk, all this stuff. So again, it's quite a deal, and it's stuff that I am paying for with my tax dollars, that you are paying for with the tax dollars. You are literally paying for the pollution of a national park. So yes, I do understand, like, I think they probably understand too, but it's such a sweet deal to be in a national park as a cattle rancher that is like, there's no incentive for them to leave besides just public pressure at this stage. The government has set it up for them, so they're going to stay.
Yeah, I understand. I understand what you're saying. Jack wants to jump in. Money, money, money. Yes. Go ahead, Jack.
Yeah, well, Scott said that all very well. Money talks. Money rules the roost here, and the money of the ag industry circles the wagons around these small ranchers, smaller, with thousands of cows at the seashore, and maintain the status quo, which is, to repeat, taxpayer-funded subsidies, taxpayer-funded, subsidized ranches in a national seashore. Out they got to go. And by the way, the other reality, which has changed, we haven't said the word climate crisis. If you believe there's a climate crisis, if you believe it's caused by humans, if you understand the reality, the opinion, the facts, that the methane from cows, no matter where they are, is a major contributor to greenhouse gases, which accelerate the climate crisis, this has to be dealt with. And you can argue about cattle if you want, but in a national park, which is why we keep hammering away, it's a national park, it's a national park. It's not an argument. Out of there. Out.
And yeah, just to really fast piggyback on what Jack said there really well. Like, again, this is a tactic that the ranch has been using for a long time. We talk about national park, and they change the conversation to be, they want to advocate for the end of ranching in all the country. Well, of course, probably a lot of folks listening to this maybe do believe that. In order for this argument to stand, we need to keep realizing this is a freaking national park. 1/3, 30% of a national park is private practice, private ranching. That is not just some like nice homestays. That is adamantly polluting the national park. I mean, it is asinine if you think about it. It really is. And this is something, and people are asking like, oh, Scott, like, man, there's such big rising bears ears. Like, why isn't that happening at Point Reyes? Well, unlike bears ears, which Trump administration took away, this has been something that's been here for a long time. So we're fighting like, oh my gosh, this is what's going on. It's like a cognitive dissonance fight, I always say. It's reminding people what is going on, opening up their eyes to an issue, which is really hard. It's really hard. You have folks who are driving through the north end of the park who are big environmentalists and who, drive through the ranches, don't think twice about it, because this is kind of how it is, right? I mean, again, I'm guilty of it. We're all guilty of that for sure. So again, there's so much of this campaign. There's so much wrong with it. And it's so unbelievable when you break it down. But again, it should be a united movement around the idea that we're just trying to save the national park system, a system that has been a world model for environmentalism.
To make a whole big mess of this, to make a whole big mess.
Wait, before we go on, let's just play. All right, go ahead quickly. And then I'm going to play Miyoko. She made 2 really strong points for you guys. So go ahead. And then we'll move on to Miyoko. Go ahead.
I was going to say, we just, as Scott says, and we'll repeat it 4 times. It's in a national park, get the cattle operations out, and say, well, you're against cows. Like, no, I just want to take the automatic weapons out of the hands of the kindergartners. Oh, you're after all. No, I just want to take the automatic weapons out of the hands of kindergarten schools. I just want the cows out of a national park and leave the wildlife alone. Let's focus on that. It's a huge coalition. Even hunters, this is a vegan show probably, but even hunters would agree, yeah, we don't want to be shooting them inside a national park because we want them to breed and survive and keep the species alive for us to hunt.
Okay, we don't really care what we don't personally on this show give up rats. Well, we love rats, so we don't care what the hunters want to do or not do other than stop hunting. But that's a good point you're making. Let's watch Miyoko.
We're going to spend millions of dollars helping these dairies become supposedly carbon neutral by financing methane digesters. Why are we doing that? Why is the state of California going to be financing methane digesters to solve a problem that's being created by a private industry on park lands? I'm not getting a handout. So why are we supporting a dying industry? Corruption. I also want to point out that of all the mammals on planet Earth, 96% of them are humans or livestock. Only 4% are wildlife. We have seen a 60% decline in wildlife in the last 60 years. Are we now going to see the beginning of that decline even more? Are we going to push those numbers down to 3% or 2%? This is what's happening right now.
That's amazing. That's their solution. Do you want to weigh in on that?
So that's Miyoko Schinner, of course, of Miyoko's vegan creamery, and she's a force. She's awesome. She's a great businesswoman and a great vegan advocate and a passionate voice and doesn't care what people think. She speaks the truth as she perceives it. She's certainly joined us in this issue. And back to your earlier question in point, Lindsay, this is a dying industry. It's a dying industry, dairying especially. So they would actually make more money if they could do the things that is the cognitive dissonance and the change that Scott was alluding to. This industry is on the way out. It will end one way or another. They've drained the water table out there. McClure, that gentleman who was talking with me in his engineer's striped clothing there, he's drained the water table in the park. He's gotten rid of some of his dairy cows because he can't keep running them, and that's even with the government subsidies. So if they were able to be flexible in their thinking, which is no easy task, as Scott was alluding to, going to the park and not knowing what I'm even seeing in this park because it's confusing, if they transition out to a plant-based business, they can actually make more money and join a growing industry. It's the future. You can do it screaming, kicking, or yelling, or you can go with the flow.
Right. And that was my point earlier. And we see the model in Scotland. They're so far ahead of us in veganism and plant-based diet and why it's important for the environment. But when they were at the huge conference that just recently, it wasn't even brought up. I mean, Greta Thunberg didn't talk about it. So that's discouraging a little bit. Not discouraging, disappointing, but certainly not anything that any of us will ever give up on trying to get this out, because it's so important, not just for the climate, which what are they going to do with their money if there's nowhere to spend it? There's no one here. I mean, everything's decimated. Everything's destroyed. We have such a short window of time left, according to experts like Dr. Silas Rao, climatehealers.org. 2026, most of the animals will have gone extinct, and we will be in big trouble. And I'm sure you can stop talk about the ocean and the ocean dying and all of that's horrific stuff. So this is not just an issue of a few poor little cattle ranchers on land that they need to keep. It's just an issue that affects all of us. And the corruption part of it, the fact that it appears that no matter what the will of the people is, it continues to go on.
It's crazy that we the people have to push on our government to do the thing that they're supposed to be representing us for. But, you know, welcome to the anti-democratic trends in this country. And for me, I don't blame the government as much as I blame the corrosive corporate influence of big money.
Right.
Scott, to you, Scott.
I mean, gosh, not really much to add there, but at the same time, I think we got to keep reminding ourselves like that this is, I think Miyoko said that really well, that this is a government handout. And the irony sometimes is that opposition usually talks about, you know, they're anti, you know, welfare, anti, you know, help for folks and everything. But at the same time, this is welfare ranching. We need to call it out as it is. They are getting subsidized. They're getting paid there for sure. That's what's going on. So at the same time, that's like the irony of this movement. That's why it's so hard almost, because there's so many issues that you could lean into, right? And there's so many people, like you could say honestly, which again, don't really agree with you policy wise, but you can agree like a lot of libertarians can almost get behind this movement saying like, we don't want our tax dollars to fund this private practice. Pollution. I mean, at the same time, there's so much stuff you can talk about here, which again is a great thing. It's a great thing to get you fired up and keep this fight going. But at the same time, when trying to articulate this message, it's a little difficult because I think it can get a little bit lost in the sense of like, oh, you guys are going against all ranching or this, and then we just got to bring it home and say, no. We are trying to kick polluting practices out of our national park. We are trying to end our tax dollars subsidizing practices that we don't believe in, nor do we see any turnaround back to it.
And I think that's very general and everyone could get behind it. Let's watch one more clip by Miyoko, and then you guys will have a chance to each weigh in before we end the show.
What about humane farming? Let's talk about humane ranching, because everyone in Marin and Sonoma believes that we practice humane ranching. Is it humane to rip a calf away from a mom and raise him in isolation in these little hutches? No. Are these, would you say these are a room of one's own? Or are they solitary confinement? I rescued a cow that was in one of those. And I can tell you when she saw the green grass at Rancho Compasión and ran and experienced liberty and freedom for the first time at the age of 3 months, she was overjoyed. And when she met her first substitute mom, she was overjoyed. I've seen the joy in individual animals. How can we tolerate so-called green?
So it's true. I mean, there's that whole other side of it for people that are, you know, the animal rights activists, and we see these CAFOs behind you when you're, not CAFOs, but where they keep the calves. They're not CAFOs. CAFOs, the overall operation, but those little hutches for the calves, which probably they freeze in. Not so much in your area. It's probably not that cold, but it's all over the country. Montana, they have them. And could you imagine how they suffer, isolated? I mean, that's unconscionable. That's a baby that we're torturing, basically.
So I get some blowback from people after every rally. We just had one this past Saturday at Chrissy Field. You know, Jack, you just don't do the vegan thing. Just stop that. It's just going to turn people off. We need to unify. Basically, reason to that. But now in this show, since I've already mentioned hunters, God forbid, I'm a vegan.
Yeah.
I have to be, or I can't stand up and say I'm an environmentalist. It's a direct contradiction. If you don't address animal agriculture, which is to say factory farming of large animals, you're not addressing the climate crisis. And that's just a reality. And that's a painful truth. And people don't want to hear it. Stop. You're driving away all the people that would come to this movement. Well, I do both. I advocate for the Park Service as we've been doing, for Point Reyes Seashore as we've been doing. At the cattle operations out of a national seashore, stop shooting the wildlife. Sounds like a good idea. But once we're up on stage, if someone asks me, I have to a vegan if I'm going to address the climate crisis. And it's also a horrifically cruel business. And anybody who denies it just doesn't want to face a very uncomfortable truth. It was a difficult transition for me, I got to say. Like, well, I'll just do milk. And then I
wasn't for me.
Once I made the transition, well, God bless you. Once I made the transition, then I was willing to look at actually all the evidence. And then it was like, oh my God, I'm ashamed. I'm ashamed.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. A lot of people will rationalize because they really don't know what else to do for their diet. Some people are even in fear. They're just not well educated. I mean, the food is so delicious. I personally learned how to cook becoming vegan. I didn't care about cooking. And now that I'm vegan, I make all this wonderful food. But there are a lot of people, and I know people myself that have diabetes and other things, are so uneducated and so tied into, you know, not animal agriculture, but big farm doctors that are tied in with big farm, that they are afraid to try a different diet. And it's almost like, for others, it's also almost like you're interfering with their heritage, their culture, all these things tied into it, their home, their safety, their affluence. So it's, as you say, Scott, so much interconnection, so much complexity. But down, if you take it to the simple fact that you're bringing out so much is, hey, it's on a public national reserve paying for with our tax dollars polluting our environment. So with that, you've each got about less than 5 minutes. You want to start, Scott, and just wrap up anything you want to say? Take as long as you want, 2 seconds, or up to you. You know, if you don't have anything else, just throw in whatever.
No, absolutely. I appreciate it. No, but I won't lament too much because, again, I feel like we've, of course, covered a lot of stuff. But yeah, I just want to touch on all that. There's so many things get fired up about this issue, right? Like, if this is, you want to see this big paradigm shift towards these plant-based diets, then let's start here. Let's start in the national park. This is the bare minimum, because we can't do it in a national park. There's no way we're gonna be able to do it anywhere. So start here if this is your fight. If you care about water quality, if you care about wild spaces, if you care about the ocean, this is your fight. If you care about how your tax dollar is spent, and if it is spent in a private practices that isn't a good turnaround, that is not in the public interest, this is your fight. This is, again, a huge time for this. We need to get this narrative out there. We're losing right now the information war. But again, let's boil it down. We are right now advocating for a national park to become a national park, straight up. We are advocating for our tax dollars not to be subsidizing practices that are polluting the Pacific Ocean. It is as simple as that. So again, I thank you all so much for listening to this and leaning in. And again, it's a lot, it's complicated, but I do appreciate this for sure.
Oh, well, thank you for being here.
Of course.
Jack, before you weigh in for the last time, let's show the calls to action. So where do people go that want to help? Let's go through this with them.
So idausa.org/elk. IDA has stepped up big time coming in from the animal rights perspective, but obviously cares about climate and the environment and all of it, all interrelated issues. So you can go to that page and there's ways to get involved, ways to donate, actions to take, and moving forward, more actions, especially for those people who live in the Bay Area, which is where this is all taking place. And then there's my treespiritproject.com/elk. That's my advocacy group for the natural world. I came in for the tree and forest advocacy, which led me into this issue at Point Reyes Seashore, where you can care about animals, care about trees and forests and natural habitats, and also deal directly with the climate crisis, which is happening in microcosm out at the seashore there, because it's taken over by cattle operations, which contribute to methane. So as Scott was saying very well, and once again, it bears repeating what Scott said. If you care about wildlife, get involved at Point Reyes. If you care about the beautiful elk, get involved at Point Reyes. If you care about corruption of government by big business, come to Point Reyes. If you care about the climate crisis, come to Point Reyes. If you care about the oceans, come to Point Reyes. It's all here. And from here, we can cover this giant, larger issue, which is global, especially if you're in the Bay Area and want to get involved in these issues. There's many ways to do it. Thank you for the time. Thank you for the show. Thanks, audience, for listening.
One more thing, folks. Share this out. Get this information out to everybody, and please take action if you want this to change. We need your help. This is not something that we can just say, oh yeah, this is terrible. We really have to make a difference, because if we allow this to happen, it will continue to happen in all of the national parks and reserves, and pretty soon they will all be gone. This is the time where you have to step up and speak out. Like they said, it doesn't matter what your view is. It doesn't matter, you know, what side of the plant-based you are. I hope you'll come over. You're pre-vegan in my book. But anyway, it doesn't matter. It's a national park. It's our land. It's being polluted. It's wrong. And we'll leave on that note. Thank you for watching. Gentlemen, thank you for being on today.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Lindsay.